Hey, RetconRaider here. Today's video is dedicated to Leroynukenson and mildly nuclear. Thanks for your support, guys. That said, let's get started. Welcome back to Fiction of Phoenix Point. Now, last time we wrapped up our analysis of briefing number 5, which largely focused on Synedrion, one of the 3 main NPC factions that will be featured in the final game. That means that today, we're finally delving into briefing number 6, not only the last of the digital anthologies, but also the only one that actually focuses on the mysterious Phoenix Project. Obviously, we've heard a lot about the Phoenix Project over the past 2 years. After all, it's the organization that the player will be taking control of during the game's main campaign. Although we've seen a lot of bits and pieces of information throughout the various stories, the writers have always been pretty cagey about the full history and nature of the project. But briefing number 6 finally changes that, at least to an extent. Looking over the briefing as a whole, briefing number 6 is approximately 64 pages long, including the introduction, 7 new stories, and 2 reprinted stories. They also released 3 additional new stories on the official website shortly after briefing number 6 was released. So, we've got a lot of ground to cover over the next 5 weeks. That said, today I thought we'd get started with one story in particular, The Barrens, by Doctor Allen Stroud. It's the second to last story in the collection, but I thought it would make for a fairly ideal starting point, because it's the third and final part of what I like to refer to as the Barnabas trilogy, for reasons that will become evident in just a few moments. At any rate, let's run through a quick synopsis of the story before we dive into the granular analysis and wild speculation. Now, The Barrens is set in the year 2046, roughly 1 year before the main campaign is set to begin. It takes place in the southwestern corner of Egypt, smack dab in the middle of the eastern Sahara Desert, one of the least hospitable places on Earth. The story focuses on a team of 4 Phoenix Project operatives: Captain Abayomi, who previously appeared in Launch Codes, Lieutenant David Cross, who appears to be her second-in-command, Sergei Grigorian, the team's mysterious sniper, and Specialist Weber, the team's medic and technician. The team was deployed to investigate a long-decommissioned Phoenix Project base built near Gilf Kabir, a massive plateau in the middle of the desert. The base was originally commissioned back in the 1970s at the height of the US-based Phoenix Project, but was eventually shut down in the 1990s, at which point, in theory, it should have been filled with cement and welded shut. However, as of 2 weeks before the story takes place, the project started detecting radio signals being sent from the location, using the old 20th century Phoenix Project equipment. The team was deployed to investigate, but the circumstances surrounding the investigation were oddly mysterious. For some reason, the team is never told why this particular base is so important. Instead, they're simply told that if certain chambers have been breached, they should evacuate immediately. Due to the extremely remote location, the team was deployed several miles from their actual destination. They spent roughly 3 to 4 days traveling across the desert on foot, but as they drew closer to the decommissioned base, they began detecting blatant signs that the area was inhabited. Most notably, they began discovering massive crosses, each decorated with the crucified remains of an infected human. These appeared to be territory markers, roughly surrounding the area where the decommissioned base was located. As they drew closer, they began to suspect that they were walking into an ambush, but there were no immediate signs of any locals. While they weren't able to locate the concrete hut that marked the entrance to the Phoenix Project facility, they did discover signs of recent disturbance. Someone or something had scorched and burned the rocks in the rough area where the entrance should have been, possibly while attempting to excavate the facility. Immediately after this discovery, the team found itself under attack by an unknown sniper. The situation quickly devolved into chaos. Captain Abayomi and Specialist Weber were pinned down by the enemy sniper, while a remotely positioned Sergei Grigorian attempted to provide them with cover fire. Lieutenant Cross, who had separated from the team, was nowhere to be found. While Grigorian was able to neutralize the enemy sniper, he was too late to prevent Weber from being badly injured, and immediately afterwards, both Abayomi and Weber were swarmed by several poorly armed and armored attackers. Fortunately, Abayomi was successful in fending off the first wave, using a combination of submachine gun fire and 2 automated turrets that she had recovered from Specialist Weber's pack. Unfortunately, there was no way to easily extract Weber, and more attackers were rapidly closing in. Thankfully, they were rescued by the timely appearance of Lieutenant Cross and a rather mysterious armored car. As they hastily made good their escape, Abayomi was shocked to discover that the armored car was actually being controlled by an artificial intelligence, Barnabas, presumably the same AI that was heavily featured back in The Good Life in briefing number 5. The story rapidly concludes after that, with Abayomi providing a short post-mission debrief. The team escaped with injuries but no fatalities. Specialist Weber would recover given a few weeks. Barnabas expressed an interest in joining the Phoenix Project, and Abayomi fully supported his request. She also reported that their mission to Gilf Kabir was a total failure, and that she had discovered almost nothing about the people who had apparently laid claim to it. She made it clear that if the Phoenix Project wanted to recover the facility, then they would need to send a much larger team, and deploy them much closer to the actual base. She also warned that, whatever secrets were in that facility, it was entirely possible that the locals had already discovered it, and that it could very well be what had driven them to so mindlessly attack the Phoenix Project team. So, now that we know the basics of the story, let's start digging a little deeper. As usual, we'll start with the simple stuff, then start branching out from there. Now, first of all, we obviously have the Phoenix Project team itself. While we don't really get to know them very well, the story does share a few interesting details. Abayomi, for example, is the character we know the most about. Like I mentioned earlier, she previously played a major role in one of the previous stories, Launch Codes, also by Doctor Allen Stroud. Back in that story, she was rather vaguely described as a dark-skinned woman in a black suit. In 2032, roughly 14 years before the Barrens, she worked alongside another Phoenix Project operative named Akemi to prevent the Indian government from triggering an all-out nuclear conflict with Pakistan. As for the rest of her team, the details are pretty sparse. Jake Cross, for example, is mentioned to be a former police officer from Botswana, while their sniper, Sergei Grigorian, is mentioned to be a relatively recent recruit, one whose personnel file has been largely redacted, and whose background was deliberately withheld from the rest of the team. Based on the etymology of their names, they seem to represent a rather interesting cross-section of multicultural operatives. If their names are any indication, we might be able to assume that Abayomi hailed from Egypt, Sergei and Weber hailed from Europe, and Cross obviously hails from somewhere in South Africa. This really stresses the multicultural nature of the project, despite the fact that, according to most of the existing fiction, it was largely based out of North America. Next, we've got the mysterious Phoenix Project base, which we really know very little about. According to the story, This base was originally a Cold War bunker built on top of a temporary Special Forces base from the 1940s. It was later acquired by the Phoenix Project in the 1970s, presumably before the disastrous Phoenix Moon mission, which marked the organization's slow downward spiral. Now, like many of the details in Allen Stroud's stories, this particular story mixes fact with fiction. In real life, there were indeed several temporary British facilities set up on or around Gilf Kabir, including a large air base that still partially exists to this day. However, there are obviously no records of any secret bunkers being built on what is now considered a site of archaeological and cultural value. As near as I can tell, the Cold War bunker mentioned in The Barrens is entirely fictional. That said, this fictional facility apparently consisted of several poured concrete testing chambers, and it was used by the Phoenix Project to develop weapons and defenses that would help them against a potential alien invasion. Although we're obviously short on details, it's evident that they must have discovered something dangerous, hence Abayomi's instructions to immediately evacuate if she discovered that Chamber 46 or 47 had been opened. That actually brings up another interesting question. Just why was this facility shut down? The most obvious assumption is that it was shut down as a result of the Phoenix Project's slowly waning influence. After all, the Hatch clearly established that the project lost their primary funding from the United States government in 1986, and From the Ashes further clarifies that they lost the rest of their meaningful funding in the early 1990s. This particular base was shut down in 1996. Then again, given the nature of the work being conducted there, as well as the mysterious warning about Chambers 46 and 47, it's entirely possible that the base was shut down for an entirely different reason. Perhaps the scientists inadvertently created something so dangerous that they deemed it necessary to immediately abandon and seal the facility. Or, given that we've previously seen hints that some shadowy organization was working against the project, it's also possible that the facility was actually seized by enemy operatives. This is a particularly disturbing thought, considering that Abayomi was unable to confirm that the facility had been properly sealed. This becomes even more disturbing once you delve into the history of Gilf Kabir and the immediately surrounding territory. The plateau itself is well known for having an unusually large number of Neolithic Petroglyphs, estimated to be roughly 10,000 years old. The most notable includes a location known as the Cave of the Swimmers, which houses numerous petroglyphs of horizontal humanoid figures, with their limbs bent as if swimming. This is particularly interesting, of course, because we know that the Pandora virus is predominantly transmitted through bodies of water, and it becomes even more interesting when you realize that the Sahara region was actually much wetter up until roughly 4000 BC. Although the modern Sahara Desert would be entirely inhospitable to the Pandora virus, it could have easily secured a foothold in the region back when the majority of those petroglyphs were actually created. In addition, another nearby landmark is known as the Cave of Beasts, housing similar Neolithic petroglyphs dating back roughly 7,000 years. While some of these images also depict similar swimming figures, they also include several other peculiar things, including over 900 hand stencils, some of them distinctly inhuman, deliberately disfigured bowl-like creatures that appear to be swallowing humans whole, and humans armed with slings investigating or exploring some kind of crack in the earth. Now this obviously sounds rather familiar. Back in The Depths of Civilization number 2, Allen Stroud wrote about a very similar Pandora virus outbreak near the Qinling Mountains in ancient China, roughly 3,000 years ago. It took place near Emodong, a massive prehistoric sinkhole known to the locals as the Demon Hole, a site which housed the remains of inhuman creatures, and which mysteriously claimed the lives of multiple explorers during an ill-fated expedition in 1915. As if that weren't enough, another major landmark near the Gil Kabir Plateau is the Kabira Crater. Although this site has never been properly investigated in the real world, it is generally thought to be the source of what is referred to as Libyan desert glass, chunks of heat-fused impactite scattered over dozens of square kilometers. We already know that the Pandora virus was first carried to Earth on a massive asteroid, which splintered after impacting our moon. It's probably safe to assume that one of the resultant fragments then landed in the Sahara region, allowing the virus to infest the area for millennia until the region transformed into an inhospitable desert roughly 6,000 years ago. It's entirely possible that the Phoenix Project scientists working in the nearby secret base were in fact experimenting with some version of the virus. That would certainly explain why the site is considered both important, but also incredibly hazardous, and why the project would risk deploying a team to investigate in 2046, even as the rest of the world lies in ruin. In fact, if I had to guess, I'd say that this is all a setup for the in-game mission that will allow the player to acquire the chitin armor and living alien weapons DLC content. The developers have long hinted that, while this content is largely cosmetic, it will be introduced through a special in-game mission. Perhaps the experiments being carried out by the Phoenix Project scientists resulted in these peculiar tools, a literal weaponization of the virus that the project is trying to defeat. Of course, that begs the other big question of just who has taken over the old Phoenix Project base. Logically, the simplest guess is that it might be the disciples of Anu. However, the details in the story don't seem to quite match up with that assumption. For one thing, Abayomi didn't see any obvious signs of infection on the people who were attacking her. According to the lore, the disciples of Anu only recruit people who have already survived being infected by the Pandora virus. What's more, the people who were crucified and used as territory markers did show signs of infection. The team even went so far as to speculate that these people were essentially executed to prevent their infection from spreading to the rest of their group. Again, that certainly doesn't match what we know about the disciples of Anu. In fact, the only things we do know about these survivors is that they were human, they were poorly armed, they were successful in gaining access to the abandoned facility, and that they showed signs of trying to capture Abayomi's team alive. Despite that, however, they clearly weren't concerned about killing members of Abayomi's team if they had to. It's hard to say exactly what they were hoping to accomplish, but it's probably fair to speculate that it has something to do with whatever they found in the facility. Which, of course, brings us to the last big question posed by the story, namely, what in the world was Barnabas doing out there? The fact that he was controlling some sort of four-wheel drive APC is already strange enough, but the simple fact that he somehow ended up in Egypt is simply mind-boggling. After all, the last time we saw him back in The Good Life, he was in Epoch 22, a Synedrion haven located in Algeria, roughly 1,500 miles away. His arrival was obviously quite fortuitous, but also perhaps a little too convenient. While it is entirely possible that it was simply a happy coincidence, it's also entirely possible that Synedrion deliberately arranged this entire incident just to draw the Phoenix Project out into the open. Now, this does get a little far-fetched, but bear with me here. We already know that at least some members of Synedrion are perfectly willing to lie, manipulate, or even kill to accomplish their goals. Would it really be all that far-fetched that they might be willing to manipulate the Phoenix Project into a situation where they could not only contact them, but also ingratiate themselves with the project at the same time? Obviously, Synedrion is a little too self-centered to sacrifice their own personnel for the sake of this charade. Rather, given that it's strongly implied that Synedrion has somehow obtained numerous old Phoenix Project files, it's far more likely that they simply learned about the base and then lured or otherwise directed a group of hostile survivors into occupying it. Then it would simply be a matter of time before the Phoenix Project would come to investigate it, at which point Synedrion would be waiting in the wings to swoop in and rescue them. Of course, it is also possible that I'm completely overthinking this. Maybe it really is just a phenomenal coincidence, or maybe there's some other explanation that I'm simply overlooking. Barnabas did study a huge number of files related to the Pandora virus, and it's very likely that at least some of them involved the Phoenix Project. Perhaps he simply deduced that Synedrion would need to ally themselves with the Phoenix Project to succeed, and his encounter with them at Gilf Kabir was simply a matter of lucky timing in the course of an investigation already in progress. Still, I can't help but feel that this really was a little too convenient. The APC, for example, is almost certainly one of the Phoenix Project's scarabs, hermetically sealed, artificially intelligent, all-terrain vehicles that the Phoenix Project designed and manufactured back in 2025. Now, we'll actually be talking about these in a future video, but for now, suffice to say, the development of these vehicles is actually what led directly to the Phoenix Project's highly public shutdown in 2026. The remnants of the project still manufactured these things in secret between 2027 and 2032, at which point they literally released them into the wild, activating the artificial intelligences and leaving them to fend for themselves in the midst of World War III. If this is indeed one of the Project Scarabs, then how did Synedrion get their hands on it? Was Barnabas originally based on one of the project's artificial intelligence cores? Did Synedrion simply discover a scarab somewhere and then install Barnabas into it? Or perhaps this isn't a scarab at all and is instead some sort of artificially intelligent vehicle of Synedrion design, one that we simply haven't seen in any of the promotional material. Some people have actually suggested that Barnabas is simply intended to act as the liaison between Synedrion and the project. But that still begs the question of whether his meeting with the project was arranged or purely by chance. It's the sort of thing that could really set the tone for the relationship between the two factions. Does Synedrion see the project as a valued ally, or simply as another resource to be exploited? That, of course, is a question we can't answer. Not yet, anyway. But we will know soon enough, once the full campaign comes out in another few weeks. For now, though, this is RetconRaider, signing off. Thanks for listening. Oh, and remember, although I do love talking about Phoenix Point, you can find out more about the game by visiting the official website, the official YouTube channel, the official Discord server, the official Facebook page, the official Twitter feed, the official development roadmap, or the original crowdfunding campaign over on Fig. As always, links are in the description.